like to start by saying good morning to everybody, and I'm really honored to be at this event today and to share the work that I've been doing over the last 9 months on with the SDG goals and trying to infuse, find ways and mechanisms to infuse this into the broader curricula at UCC. But I'd also like to share with you a little bit of the context about what's been happening at UCC and something of a sustainability journey that's been occurring over, well over a decade. And for starters here, I'd like to just do a little exercise with all of you. And I'd just like to do this with Mentimeter. And part of this is a really nice tool to use with students, but to sort of gather input, especially in this virtual world. But the website is menti.com, and there's a code there, 4350562. And if you go to that website, and it should look like this. And then you can see where you enter in the code number and hit submit, and that'll take you to a query for 3 keywords. And it's best if you could just do this with individual words. And what sustainability means to you. And it's kind of interesting to see, because I think sustainability means many things to many people. And I think part of this work is trying to create a language of sustainability that really cuts across disciplines. And so this input helps me a little bit just to sort of get a glimpse into that. But it's also something, again, sort of highlighting this tool that could be used. So I'm just going to give you a moment or two to work on that. And there's also a QR code. If you're familiar with that sort of thing, you can just sort of turn your phone on that, and that'll take you right to the Menti site. And one other thing I'm going to do, just in case anybody's having trouble, is I'm going to, if I can figure out how to do this, I'm going to paste that address into the QA stream. So this will come through to the audience as an announcement. So it should be there, hopefully. I don't know if it needs to be sort of approved or anything. Okay, so it looks like it's live. So right now I'm just going to press on with a few things, and you can just go ahead and finish up the Menti Cloud if you're working away on that. And am I still actually sharing? It's still showing my presentation on the screen, right? Just want to make sure that.
Yes, it is. It's showing the Mentimeter screen.
Okay, good. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of something I've done, and I've been piloting these ideas in a variety of classes, and I'm an ecologist by training. So, and I'm trying to go as far away from my own discipline as possible to do these exercises. And this was to I believe it was a marketing class. It was either that or management, business management. But I did it before and after with the same sort of thing of showing having them build a word cloud before. And what I was seeing was very sort of everything was focused environment, green, trees, and long term doesn't necessarily mean it's a long term problem. What I found out is when people say long term, they often mean that that's a long term, like we'll get to it later, so it's not as immediate. So, but again, this is, very good terms, very good words that are coming up here, thinking about children, longevity, all these things. But after, say, a 45-minute lecture, I would sort of get things like this, and the contrast is a little weak there, so I'm sorry about that. But part of this, it was a marketing class. So I talked a little bit about circular economy, which I really love because it's based on ecological principles. But you can just see the shift in that one little lecture on just what they thought sustainability was. It wasn't just a green thing. It just wasn't planting trees, but it really became starting to think more about equality, thinking about transformation, thinking about society, but still, remembering the environment. So just these sort of little indicators like this can give you feedback from a group of students, especially in this virtual world, but it helps keep them engaged too in the process, so they're not just sort of passively sitting in front of a monitor like they're watching television or something. So this is just an idea, and what I'll do is at the end of my talk, I'll go ahead and go back to Mentimeter, and I'm going to put the word cloud into the chat stream so that everybody can see that. So I'm going to move on to the next slide now, and this idea of what is sustainability, and I do see that pretty much everybody has a different definition, and it many times runs across a spectrum of ideas. And at the left, there's a man that's literally has the last individuals of a species of desert pupfish in that bucket, and he was returning them to a restored habitat. And that's a version of sustainability, but that's very conservation oriented. That's just at the very sort of extreme end of preservation and conservation. But then if you go all the way to the right there, you can have the vision of the shining city on the hill, living side by side with nature in perfect harmony and balance. And, you know, this it's a lofty ambition, but a goal nonetheless, and something to aspire to. And then people tend to have somewhere in the middle is where they'll place what they think sustainability really means, you know, and whether it's in the here and now or whether it's, you know, a goal to reach in the future. So it's just something to bear in mind of, you know, that you see many definitions, and UCC developed a sustainability plan, and in that is a definition of sustainability, which is very similar to the Brundtland definition from the United Nations, you know, was the foundation of this, you know, the whole idea of sustainable development was having the three central pillars of the social, the environmental, and the economic. And I think that really is something that cuts across all definitions. But the UCC definition went a little bit to think about what we do is, you know, with our students in developing, you know, sort of the intellect and trying to develop, you know, basically whole people that are going to go out into the world and affect change in some way and innovate and all these great ideas. But it's really to allow us to create and live in a society. So that's where we really bring in the academic angle. And then, you know, but then we get back to that sort of classic definition of not compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And, you know, and so that we can have a thriving world, but they can also as well into the future. And this part reminds me of something that was very inherent. You know, if you haven't picked up on my accent from now, I am from the States. And the Iroquois Confederacy, which was many parts of the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. government were actually modeled after the Iroquois Confederation, but not really credited. But one of the ideas that they had was the idea of 7 generations. When they had their council decisions and they made decision processes, they were thinking 7 generations into the future of what the impacts might be. And of course, these people were considered savages at the time, but they had sort of this whole ethics and ethos of sustainability was really built into what they did and how they functioned. So moving now to the sustainability journey at UCC and really how this has been. And I think, you know, it's important to realize that it just didn't happen overnight at UCC, and it's been well over a decade. And it started with students back in 2006 who were really wanting to do something better, to realize that there were problems in the world and to see what they could do within UCC. And it really centered around waste practices of the college and trying to really get a recycling program moving. And one that led to another where the administration took notice and staff wanted to work with the students. And then this, you know, working with Antashka and developing a Green Campus Committee, which eventually, you know, 3 years later in 2010 brought us to our first green flag. And that was the first green flag worldwide for an institution of higher education. And also UCC started to move into looking at a few of the different metrics out there of, and looking at them very reflectively as an institutional practice of, like, you know, the green metric, the ISO 50001 certification. And these were ways to sort of improve our practice and almost do a gap analysis to see where we were limited and when we were weak. Just moving along here a little bit, in 2016 was the sustainability strategy, which, you know, I showed you a little bit of earlier. And that actually was a key piece because it showed, you know, the administrative recognition of the importance and a document that can be quoted and, you know, and objectives to try to meet and to move along. And at the same time, transdisciplinarity at UCC really sort of came into its own. And there was a conference a few years previous, but it transpired into a book. And the book was about using transdisciplinarity in the transition to sustainability. And with the idea that we really need to honor all the disciplines and bring them all to the table and come in a way with humility and stepping aside from disciplinary ego and trying to find that commonality to work together. And it can even be outside of the academic realms of bringing knowledge to the table. Another key bit here too, which I'll talk about, is in 2018, we were awarded a gold star, and that's and I'll get to that in a little bit. So I'm going to move on now about the sustainability strategy, and just really quickly, at the heart of this is learning and teaching. We are an academic institution, and this is really the core key cog in the wheel, in the machine there of moving things. And these are interlinked wheels that are moving, and one does affect the other. And and sort of the outcomes are at the end of the line on the right. We're really trying to get our graduates who are being sustainability conscious citizens and incorporating this into their life, whether it's their personal life, their professional life, but also how we operate as an institution, because it is a business, and it's also a business that can be a model to the greater community. So the next slide here is thinking in terms of, the formal, the informal, and the hidden curriculum, right? There's a few divisions that are often given to this, and the hidden can also be called the subliminal curriculum. But this is what the institution does and what students learn just being around and seeing, and how the culture and the practices and how the business is run. And this is where UCC really made the start, right, with recycling and doing this. And I think that was very, in hindsight, it was actually very good that, and it sort of did go from right to left here in the screen, that sort of how we practice, and then starting into the Green Campus, forums and the committees and the clubs, the environmental clubs and all these things, and outside of the classroom that began to take hold. And then now, and then the next step really to come along was more of the formal curriculum, getting it into the classroom. And even with these efforts, and I'll show you in a second again, we still have a long way to go. But I think the important part of having that foundation of the hidden curriculum in place is that there's not a hypocrisy there when you start talking about it in the classroom. And it really makes the educator's job much, much easier, that there isn't this hypocrisy, and that as an institution we are walking our talk. So now, building upon this and thinking about more the justifications and rationales for of including sustainability and infusing it more and more into the curricula is, of course, we have the ESD framework, the national framework, which is expiring this 2020, and there's a new one coming out soon. And there's calls for consultations, and hopefully everybody will give their input to it. And hopefully that this version will be maybe a little bit more, have more teeth into it, more resources associated with it, which were lacking in the first. And the first version was policy rich, and maybe it can be more practical, moving forward, which is what the UK has done themselves with their most recent version. As far as the academic strategy, which was launched in 2018, sustainability was at the core of this. And again, these are, giving that top-down institutional support that allow things to happen. So it started out grassroots, students, staff moving up, the administration buying in, but now the institution is giving us sort of what we need to be able to move forward and to really become a whole university approach. So I guess at GMIT, I'm sure that, from what I heard, I imagine you all are celebrating your new president there and her vision of sustainability, which I was actually glad to hear myself. So moving down, transdisciplinarity, which I talked about earlier, it's, it's a need for me as far as I'm concerned when it comes to the SDGs, just by their broad scope and their nature. We need to really step outside these disciplinary boundaries, the so-called silos. Another important aspect of the SDGs in particular is it was the Irish ambassador, David Donoghue, who was the co-facilitator in that negotiation process for the 2030 agenda, which includes the SDGs. And with his Kenyan counterpart, they actually got unanimous agreement, which, is not easy to do with that many nation states at the United Nations. Of course, there are weaknesses in it, and that can be part of the lesson with them as well. And come 2030, when there's the next version of this, maybe there'll be a stronger version. Maybe there'll be one that has not just recommendations, but is actually enforceable. Who knows? The future is coming. But and then our own graduate attributes, sort of also give a need for the sustainability in the curricula, especially in terms of social responsibility and global citizenship. So now just looking at the this real quickly, this is the academic strategy, and priority 1 is a connected curriculum based on sort of the model put forth by University College London. And there's six main pillars to this, one of which is sustainability, trans and interdisciplinarity as well, a global reach, community engagement, research-based teaching, and employability. And really all of these can be brought into sustainability. And in fact, there was just a strategic pivot, which has become one of the buzzwords, pivoting during the crisis. But it really looks at sustainability now as the glue that's holding this all together, because it really does infuse out into all these areas. So now the STARS report that I had mentioned earlier was, it is ASHE, and it's about looking at sustainability within higher education institutions specifically, and looking at all aspects of the operations, the classroom, procurement, innovation, research, and we did very well in some areas, enough to win a gold star. But one of the sort of the gaps that this evaluation brought out was our curriculum, and on this image on the right is showing the 17 global goals on the outside. And on the inner side is the number of modules that actually addressed sustainability, the SDGs directly, and which ones they could be mapped to. And this only accounted for 6% of our modules, which to me seemed low. And 60% of the academic departments were addressing, sustainability across a course of study. So, so at least it's well distributed around, but still 6% is pretty low, especially, with what I hear the students are asking for. So all these pieces that I brought to you so far were put together into a proposal to the National Forum and the HEA to build a resource to help, a teaching enhancement tool, if you will, to bring sustainability into the curriculum and make it easier and sort of bring down the barriers and obstacles so that staff could bring this into their curriculum, into their lecture, to conversation in their classroom. So one of the first steps in this process was having sort of focus sessions, and which in the virtual lockdown made it more like a one-on-one conversation. It wasn't big rooms, but it allowed a more intimate conversation, which I thought was really more fruitful in a way. And so I started with the staff, and I started thinking, what is it you want? What will make it easier for you? How can we address this? And what I did find out is that many were already addressing the SDGs. And when you look at the broad range and the scope of these SDGs, it's about sustainability in terms of a civilization, about our societies. It's really so broadly encompassing that it's hard not to be addressing the SDGs in some way. The question is, does it create a larger conversation on sustainability, or is it just a passing moment? People want something, the thing I kept hearing was ease of use, so many demands put on them, the classroom, the time, blah, 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 that they're just really wanting, a lot of people were wanting off-the-shelf, plug-and-play sorts of things like short videos and backgrounds and bulleted briefs. And, some of the staff wanted to go deeper, and they were, sort of already there with sustainability in the classroom. So they're looking for case studies and databases and discussion ideas and things they can bring into their assessments. And group projects, and also looking at really cross-cutting themes like COVID and climate change and even migration, which touch upon all pretty much SDGs and pretty much all SDG targets if you look at something like climate change. And even COVID, we see such a broad range of beyond the health issue, the economics, the environment, actually the environmental rebound in certain areas where you could see the Himalayas from Delhi in the first time in decades, so there were, COVID really did have this broad-reaching effect. From the students, it was very interesting. They were asking for practical, something that they can put into application, something that means something to their world. They just don't want an extra, a piece of paper that they throw into the recycling bin at the end of the semester. They want authentic. They don't want just a box ticking exercise like sustainability was covered, but they really want to delve into this. They want real world, and they really want to address the issue of climate change. And I got the sense about, the climate anxiety is there. And it's something that, in the literature, when they talk about, the climate anxiety, especially in young people, there needs to be a sense of hope, and there needs to be a sense that they can take action. And these are some of the ideas to really keep in mind if this is brought into the classroom in these conversations about, just don't make it a doom and gloom Armageddon scenario, but to really what can be done and what can we do to take some kind of action to be part of the solution. Group projects, really a like for group projects and realizing this is the way the world works, but fair assessments at the same time. And they liked the idea, and they were asking for is to have more creation of learning artifacts, tangible things that they can in turn use, especially in the area of climate, that they could sort of launch that video into their own social media platform. They love TikTok. One student in particular said, if you can't say what you want to in 1 to 2 minutes, you're wasting everybody's time. So to have clear, concise ideas and objectives and to be able to package it very discreetly. So I thought that was very, to me, illuminating. But a lot of savvy there and a lot of realization that climate change is jeopardizing their future. And so putting this all together, kind of coming up with a bit of a conceptual model, again, having action-oriented outcomes, things that are tangible, things that, can feel like they're being, somehow a part of the solution and working together in teams and to be learning, to be solving, but also be able to share this tangible product at the end. And in the lower part of this panel is really the idea here, and again, fitting with the Irish framework, is to empower students so they can be change makers, that they can leave and to do something positive in the areas of climate change and sustainability. Many of our students are already very politically involved. This Friday Futures, and I've been amazed at some of the young people I've met and the situations I've seen them in. Civic engagement, we really need to be working with our community partners, and again, that fits with our strategic, our own strategic plan here of community engagement. The collaborative bit, to be working with their peers, again, to be working transdisciplinarily if possible, and to be getting that exchange of ideas from other disciplines, trying to change lifestyle, and again, communicating. That's really what they want to do. So now I'd like to just share with you something that's just an idea that you can bring this into your classroom, but it also saved me a little bit of time on the Sustainable Development Goals. UN puts this out as, I think, a 3-minute video, and this is something that could even be put in online of, maybe you feel like, I can't really go deeply into sustainability. I don't have the capacity myself, but something like this could be put out there, then framed into the context of the discipline, and then have students discussing this in the discussion forum and see where it goes. So let me just.
In the year 2000, leaders from 189 countries agreed on a vision for the new millennium. They wanted to end extreme poverty in all of its forms. So they made a list of 8 goals called the Millennium Development Goals, and they wanted to achieve these goals in 15 years. One of the leading organizations working to fulfill these goals has been the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP. We're present in more than 170 countries and territories. We championed the goals so that people everywhere would know what they were and how people could do their part. We funded projects that helped fulfill the goals. We helped countries accelerate NDG progress by breaking down the silos and working across sectors. We acted as scorekeeper, helping countries to track progress. As a result, the number of people that live on less than $1.25 per day has dropped by more than half. The number of primary school-age kids who don't go to school, down by almost half. The number of people getting life-saving treatment for HIV increased by over 15 times. Child mortality, down by almost half. As much progress as we have made together, there's still a lot more to do. Over 800 million people are still living on less than $1.25 a day. 1 in 9 people on our planet goes to sleep hungry each night. Deforestation remains alarmingly high in many countries. Oceans are becoming more acidic, threatening food security and marine ecosystems. And about 1 of every 6 adults in the world is illiterate. 2/3 of them are women. We think those are tough numbers, and so do leaders from the countries where we work. So in September 2015, they agreed on a new set of goals to help finish the work we all started in 2000. The new goals are called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. We have made significant progress in the last 15 years, and we think there's plenty of room for hope, for action, in the next 15 years. Today, the world is more connected by technology. We know more about how to balance the 3 pillars of sustainable development: social progress, economic growth, and environmental protection. However, our climate is changing. Our planet is transforming. And there are more people on Earth than ever before. We at UNDP believe everyone can have enough of what they need, living within our planetary boundaries, and we are working around the world to make this happen. Our goals to reach by 2030 are to eradicate extreme poverty, protect our environment, and much more. UNDP has 50 years of experience working with countries to make this a more prosperous, healthy, inclusive, and sustainable world. Join us.
So there's a lot of resources out there like this. This could even be used in a classroom if we ever get back into the classroom to, sort of break up and be a segue to, sort of change the focus for a little bit, or again, to just have it in the virtual setting, or even if you're teaching a face-to-face class, there could be a companion, LME, whichever you're using, Canvas or Blackboard, where these sorts of things could be there if you feel that you can't get the sustainability, but you realize the importance of it. Now, with the SDGs, I think it's also important to remember there's always, you can't just take one SDG and consider it away from everything else. That it really is part of a holistic package. They really are interconnected, and there's no getting around that. And the SDGs are also sort of can be looked at with these three pillars, with the environment or biosphere at the base, the foundation, because without that, we don't function as we're still biological entities, right? We need the biosphere. But then the society, how we interact with each other, is the next layer up, and then upon that is the economy, which is how we move the goods and services and how we sort of expand. And then at the very pinnacle is goal 17, which is building the partnerships. This sort of connected idea is sort of displayed in this image on the right, and the 5 turquoise circles are SDGs related to the climate change, 13. And what this image is showing is direct connections to other targets. So there's 5 targets under SDG 13, right? These 5 turquoise spheres. And it's showing the linkage, and the smaller the line between them, the tighter the linkage, like 9A and 9.4 are really closely related to 13. But again, these are all, with climate change, there's a direct impact to all these other targets. And that's something really to bear in mind if you're bringing out the SDGs, is again, there needs to be that big picture moment, and the perfect time is at the beginning of a semester, about how a module relates to the whole, to the world at large, and then where's the place that we fit. And again, not dismissing the discipline altogether, because there's a strength in the focus of a discipline, but to realize that it's not acting alone, it's not its own little world, that there are these interconnections. So now this is a sort of a UCC thing related to the connected curriculum, and it was a way to sort of gauge or get a sense of how deeply those different pillars of transdisciplinarity and global reach and all. And this is just pulling out the one for sustainability, and it was sort of put into 5 categories. Sort of, if you want to think from novice on the left all the way to sort of the expert on the right, but looking at how deeply sustainability is brought into a module. On the far right, is it just sort of a related topic, kind of discussed a little bit, maybe indirectly. Next to the right of that is it really looked at from a disciplinary perspective, like green media or circular economy, which I mentioned earlier, how it can be a theme that's built around, but looking at it from the perspective of that discipline. Now, sort of in the middle, then we start to get to the point where we're actually addressing SDG targets in a very intentional way, but also considering it interdisciplinary. Again, getting outside that silo. Now, to me, the minimum, my perspective should really be the next step to the right, about including the SDGs into assessments, into the learning outcomes, because that's the point where students are really going to take notice. And it's also saying that we think, as educators, we think this is important as well, important enough that it is part of the assessment. And then to the far right is, when this really starts getting on and taking hold and being, something of really a class in sustainability, there are these action-oriented outcomes. There's transformative learning, and best if there's some engagement with community partners. Not only are we helping them solve their problems and making them in the community realize the importance of the SDGs, but we're building those linkages, and which can only benefit our students, in terms of employability. So now a part of these workshops that I've been doing at UCC, and come March, I'm actually going to be opening them up to all the HEIs in Ireland. So this is, what I'm doing right now is just in a nutshell, but there's much more expansive. And in there's a tool that I use for mapping the SDGs to your own module, maybe even a course of studies, and how you're covering the goals. And so I'm just going to show you real quickly how this works. And again, you're welcome to join later, probably around March, mid to late March, where we'll be looking at this, having 2 or 3 workshops that are going to be open to everybody. And so this is done in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's really, the idea is to get you to look at your own module and how either you are covering the SDGs and maybe don't know it, how you could find inroads for the SDGs into your classroom, but then to sort of get a visual representation of this, and then at the end reflect upon it. So the idea is to try and pick out one SDG that you think is the main one, and then to score it using that same scorecard I showed you earlier, I think 2 slides back, whether it's no coverage, whether you're sort of indirectly covering it or even unintentionally, whether you're getting to the point of, inter-transdisciplinary approach, hitting SDG targets. Is it part of the assessment, the outcomes? And again, is it action-oriented, and with the community to get a 5, right? So the idea is then scrolling down this Excel spreadsheet, and then entering your data into a table here in the blue area. And what I've done is I teach environmental sciences sometimes, and so that's one that you really do cover a lot of SDGs. As an ecologist, I'm heavy on life on, especially a marine ecologist, life underwater, but life on land, a big part of what I'm doing. But environmental sciences is policy, it's natural resource management, it's a lot of different areas. So you are getting into areas of hunger and sustainable cities, and all these are all a part of it, but maybe in a less focused way or a less involved way. So scrolling down a little, and then the way I have this set is on any of these SDGs. If you're not sure, maybe this is all brand new to you. So you could click on sustainable cities, and it'll take you to UN website where you could get more information on what that goal is, and then even go further down into what the targets are. So trying to make sure that everybody has the resources, and trying to make sure this also can fit the novice all the way up to the expert, which has been one of the challenges. So the result then of that data table I showed you 2 slides back would be a spiky polar graph, radar graph, many names to this. And what this is showing, again, environmental sciences really covers, a number of these. And more doesn't necessarily mean better, where an introductory level class may have more of a survey and may cover more areas, where a higher level class may be more focused, and it really is just hitting, goal, say 14 in my case, with marine biology or something. So, but it's really how deeply you cover it. Do you really get to the point where you're hitting a 5 or a 4 or something like that, or is it just all zeros with maybe a 1? So then the next thing it also does is it looks at pillars. So taking that same data table and sort of crunching it down and to see if you hit those multiple pillars of the SDGs. In this case, the way I teach environmental sciences, it has to, but again, this doesn't mean more is better. It may be just a focused class that really hits societal, but there is, again, the more you can bring out the interlinkages of the impacts of society on economy or on environment, I think the better. So the end then would be looking, as a reflection, about, what you saw in that image, what you thought about so far, how you can expand your treatment of the SDGs, or where you didn't even realize maybe you were covering the SDGs. And so then the question is how you can signpost that what you're already doing, because it may be already there. It's just a matter of giving it framework in relation to this sort of interconnected framework of the SDGs. And the perfect time again is at the beginning of the semester, and then bringing it back up to the big picture at the end of a semester. So the students can reflect upon what they learned and then how it does fit into this global compact, this global initiative. Trying to get them to think about interconnection of other SDGs. Do you get to the point where you're transdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary at least with this? Maybe the solution is to get a friend of yours who's another lecturer and swap lectures in the different modules to get that sort of effect going, so the students start to see beyond just the one discipline. And then again, trying to get to the learning outcomes, to the assessments. So just a few more slides in conclusion is I think most people, when they think of Bloom's taxonomy, or you may remember it from the distant past, but education, Western education really tends to give most weight to the cognitive in trying to get, and rightly so, we want to be synthetic thinkers. We want to be able to evaluate. We want to really take ownership and understand the knowledge, right? And to hopefully, but to really sort of cultivate wisdom, I think we need to really move beyond just the cognitive domain. And I think this is something that has been lost. And to really think about that affective domain, especially, which is really thought of as the emotional aspect, and values. What are the values? And this is a big part of the green campuses, right? Is value. But then sort of looking at that sort of active learning strategy, which does bring into play the psychomotor. Of course, you can think about, science labs and all that, where you're, mixing chemicals and all, and that's also another example of the psychomotor aspect. But this idea has also been taken on by certain aspects of education for sustainable development. And I have ESB there. I guess I didn't pay my electricity bill, but that should be ESD. So it's really been taken now to be the head, heart, and hands. And that when there's this balance of that, that's when you have a high performance individual. The one is balanced. And this is, we talk about, wanting our students to be whole, our graduates to be whole people to move forward, and this is the one way to get at it. But again, this head, heart, and hands model has its roots in the Gray's, in the Bloom's taxonomy. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that, that sort of bringing and embedding these sustainability, it needs to cut across the organization, not just the classroom, but all aspects of what the student sees are a part of the learning process, even if it is subliminal. And this is a bottom-up approach, and we're still using the bottom-up approach by getting that, looking at the students as co-creators in this process. The sustainability is always going to be evolving. It's an ideal we're striving for, but it's going to be a journey. No matter how far we get along, there's always going to be more to do and to improve and to become more sustainable to the point where we are carbon neutral, or we are nitrogen neutral, all these things, right? So then moving down, getting it into the values and the missions of the university, especially for us, was important with all those strategic plannings. And again, to think of these, even the Green Flag program itself, to think of it in terms of a gap analysis, as you're sort of moving forward and getting the renewal of your Green Flag. We're on the 4th now. So when you get that sort of getting that feedback about where can we improve, where can we make it better, and the Green Flag itself is a nice accolade, but again, that's a process. It's not an endpoint. It's a continual process to strive to be more and more conscious in this area. And the last thing I'd just like to bring it back is to the SDG toolkit, that it will be, and I'm in the process right now of creating the webpage to put forth all these resources that I've curated or created, and it's going to be open source. It'll be open source for everybody in Ireland, and that's part of what I want to use these other workshops in March is to kind of launch that idea and make people aware of that, and to have it be hands-on with the toolkit itself online. And we use Canvas here at UCC, so I'm going to be putting it into the Canvas Commons, but also be, if somebody's using a different LME, I'd be happy to share resources that you can then bring it into your LME, especially at this time of, we've done so much virtual. And there's also one last thing I'd like to mention is just got some funding from the National Forum for another project, which is working through the Green Campus Network. So I hope that, to engage all of you, and I've already talked to Mark about this, of trying to, to basically to get to all the institutions in the Green Campus Network, and to look at curricula, and to look at what are the barriers, what can we do to make more meaningful curricula in this area, and especially courses that actually relate directly to sustainability. So this is a work in progress that'll be coming soon, and it'll be again in this virtual format. So those will be also later in the year, and that'll be rolling out. So in conclusion, I'd just like to, to say thank you and for your attention, and to remember these people, what they're calling for. They really want to see this. They really are concerned about their future. And if you really listen to what they're having to say, there's a lot of brightness. There's a lot of a willingness to move forward. It's not a very lazy generation, this coming up right now. They're really engaged, but they also do have they realize this, that they don't have the depth of knowledge that they want, and they want to be enabled in this area. Many of them, not everybody, right? But there's, but it's amazing in some of the data I've seen in some of the surveys of, what's being called for by the students, and they're asking for it. And again, I'm at UCC in Cork, and I'm in the Center of Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning. Happy to talk about this to anybody. Happy to to help anybody along with this, and also there's my email address if you want to contact me, and I can for information if you're interested in these workshops that'll be coming out later in the year.